all hooked up with the microphone. Can you all hear me up the back okay? Fantastic. And this is going to be recorded and I think, all being well, will be available online as well if there are people who've missed out on coming here. So my name's Tamara. I'm one of the school psychologists at IGS. There's myself and Joe. It's really nice to have this forum to come and speak with you because often we only kind of meet parents in a one-on-one situation and usually when there's something a little tricky going on. So it's quite nice to do these kind of talks, speak in general about, I guess, some of the philosophies that I really espouse to parents and to kids and what I think is really helpful in growing up these beautiful, healthy, happy, positive members of society that we have at the school. But I'm thinking, we're all just straight off the bat from the morning run to get into school. And I don't know how you all found it, how many tantrums you all experienced this morning, how many were from your children, how many were from you. I know I had a tricky conversation about why we couldn't get the one missing bell sock out of the washing to wear with the clean one. Why they don't get washed in pairs, I don't know. But this is what I deal with, certainly, and I dealt with this morning. Whoever knew that leaving the house could be so complicated? There's a great Michael McIntyre skit about that, about how when you don't have kids, you just leave the house. And when you have kids, there's a million little things you have to do. And there just are. There's a lot of great things, there are a lot of irritations, there are decisions we make all the time about what we say yes to, what we say no to. And I'm hoping today to talk a little bit about the value of saying no, of setting limits and boundaries. I'm a big proponent of saying yes as well, so it's not that I would ever advocate for a very rigid no and lots of lockdown boundaries, but I do think that sometimes we have a little bit of trouble this day and age saying no, but I'll say more about it. This talk is probably aimed more for those of us who might have a little bit more trouble setting those boundaries, who tend to get caught in these cycles of kind of back and forth with their kids or a behaviour you just can't seem to get quite on top of. But it's not that it's not for parents who are quite happy saying no. Because I think it's always worth being intentional about what we're doing. Why are we setting those boundaries? Why the limits? What's our reason for doing so? How do we do it? And taking the time to be able to reflect and think about it, I think is really important. There's a bit of a giggle going on down there. I don't know. Is it?
I didn't think it would hit high quite so soon.
Okay. Okay, well that's a good thing. I didn't know if I had something on my face. Okay, so let me just get in the habit of using this. So, what type of parent are you? And I think, there's a whole range. I see parents who have read every book on the subject, read every website, every forum, are online all the time. Those of us who just think, it's a natural thing, I'm just going to wing it and do what we need to. But as I already said, I do think that it's really important to think about what we're intending to do as parents. What are the values we want to grow in our children? How do we go about that? How are we modelling for them what we want them to do as well? It's obviously very complex. But the main point I wanted to think about is how we can be responsive and not just reactive. Because I think often we find ourselves, and I know at school as well sometimes, putting out fires all the time, rather than being on the front foot and setting things up the way we want to and having a bit of an alliance with our partners, if we've got a partner in the home also doing the parenting, where we're on the same page and working for the same thing in a similar kind of way, but also for ourselves, that we know where we're heading in that regard. Okay, this is a mistake one, but so parenting styles. You've probably all heard about the kind of three major ones that are spoken about in terms of being authoritarian, being permissive, being authoritative, sending people into rounds of giggles each time. And, obviously we don't want to be too stereotypical. There are huge grey areas with parenting, but I guess we've probably seen in the last few decades a move from a more authoritarian style where it's parents kind of say what it is and you deal with it. I know my grandmother talks about her parents' philosophy was children are like fish, they should be seen and not heard. to something that's much more permissive in the last little while, where we want to give our children an opportunity to have their own voice, to thrive, to do what they like, to follow their lead. And there's lots of positive things about that. There's lots that's great, but sometimes we fear that it's kind of swung too far the other direction. And that's kind of what I'm trying to address today. And I've certainly had parents say to me in session, I don't get to have much of a say in what my child does in their spare time or what have you. And I think, well, probably should. How you go about that is obviously the tricky part. Okay. So what do I mean by saying no? So when I'm talking about saying no, I'm thinking about limits, boundaries, rules, expectations we might have for our children. And so this is useful for a wide variety of things. So we often think about that more in terms of acting out behaviours. You know, when our kids throwing a tantrum, or they're being rude, or they're being particularly demanding, how do we manage that? How do we say no? How do we put the right limits on it? And obviously that is something we really need to think about. We need to set limits. You can run down the street, but you can't run onto the road. You know, so we've got to help to manage their behaviour for safety reasons, but also in terms of their kind of moral development. But then it's also useful on the other side, and I think that's where we often miss out on thinking about it, helping our kids with their anxieties. So, you know, if you have a child who doesn't want to go upstairs on their own because they're scared, those kinds of things quickly devolve into this pattern where they literally cannot step a foot on the stairs without having you right by their side. And I have parents coming all the time talking about these kinds of things. And it's really tricky because you're seeing your child in distress. They're saying, Mummy, I need you, Daddy, I need you. But to be able to say, no, I'm not going to let you avoid this situation and keep it going for you, but I'm going to help you to figure out how to manage it and face it, is something really critical. And I think something we often don't think about in terms of setting limits. So I want to address both the kind of acting out behaviours, but also those that are probably more anxious, where we're wanting to encourage our kids to build resilience and cope with tricky scenarios in their lives. And that is really the key other part of this, is how to help them to develop resilience and independence. There's a lot now coming out about that we've probably gone too far, that we do want to wrap our kids in cotton wool a bit. You've all heard about helicopter parents and various things. I think a really good example of this is they've started putting risk back into playgrounds, where they used to, you know, wrap all kinds of things in, you know, those foam mats. But then kids would run into a pole and not know that running into a pole usually hurts because it's wrapped, right? We're just overdoing the removal of any risk, any ability to learn when you get hurt and how you might fall and what to do. So we've got to be aware that we're not going too far the other way. Okay, so I've written just miles of notes. I'm just trying to make sure I cover. There's so much to talk about. But I think it's worth thinking about, what are your goals as parents? And I think pretty quickly we come up with some sort of list about what are the values we want for our kids. And it'll be something along these lines. We want them to be secure, healthy. We want them to have some kind of a strong moral compass, hopefully in the direction that we also believe. To them to be resilient, that they can manage change, they can manage difficult things that may come up for them, that they're a positive functioning member of society, that they can live independently one day, they can get a job, they can contribute well to the society, the community in which they live, and they can enjoy healthy, great relationships. And they can live a meaningful life, that they're fulfilled by what they do. I mean, this isn't something that generally people disagree about. These are the kinds of values, I'm sure. I mean, I may well have missed some, but I would imagine we'd all very quickly come to agreement that we all care about these things. So how do we go about that? And I guess the question, well, there are many questions, but one of them is what we're doing as parents encouraging those values and helping them to build those? And how do we go about that? So why can it be so tricky to avoid saying no? And I think one of those things I've already touched on is we want to provide our kids with every opportunity. You know, we're in a very privileged position in this society in general that we can afford to give our kids great education, access to fabulous extracurricular activities, the clothes that they might need, certainly the food and the shelter that they need, exploratory holidays to different places, going to museums, all these really enriching experiences, and that's fantastic. I mean, what parent doesn't want to provide their child with that? But sometimes that quest for everything means that the child comes to expect absolutely everything, and on a whim, just as soon as they might want it. And so that wholesome kind of very well-intentioned desire can very quickly kind of go too far. We don't want our kids to be overly entitled. We don't want them to demand and expect that the world owes them and they should get everything. So it's trying to find the balance in there. And I'll get to the how at the end. I was kind of setting up the thinking around it first. And we really want our kids to be happy. I mean, no parent wakes up and thinks, I want to make my child's life difficult today. I want them to cry, I want them to chuck a tantrum, that's my aim. You know, it's not like that, right? We want, maybe sometimes I see you nodding down there, but you know, we really want our kids to be happy. There's nothing more joyful than seeing my daughter excited and jumping around from happiness. I mean, it's just the best thing ever. But I think for our kids and in society in general, there's this push to happiness that absolutely abandons the idea that there's any value in basically any other emotion, particularly the negative ones. There's this kind of preference for happiness over everything else. And the problem with that becomes that, first of all, it's not realistic that we're going to be happy all the time. It's also probably not healthy. You know, I worry much more about a kid who comes and they cannot express any negative emotion about anything. You know, somebody might have really done them wrong and they're like, oh, that's okay. It's fine, you know. I think, well, no, it's not okay, you know. It's a healthy thing to have a reaction to that. So really, my big philosophy, and I probably say this every talk I give, is about the widest range of emotions is the healthiest way for your child to be. And it's hard as a parent to see your kid in distress or upset about something, but it's a critical thing for them to know, A, it's okay, it's normal, it's healthy, it's part of being human, but B, that my mum and dad can cope with it. The people in my life aren't freaked out by that and aren't kind of giving me the message, no, let's make you happy, no, you're okay, straight away. But then that they develop the skills of how to cope with those emotions. And if you've never experienced it, you're not given the message that it's okay to have those feelings, you're not going to be able to develop the skills to cope with it. So that's a big one. One of the other ones, of course, is to avoid tantrums and escalations, why we might avoid saying no. And obviously at times, you've just got to do what you've got to do. I had to get out the door today. I'm like, okay, you can wear mismatching socks, I don't really care, whatever, get in the car, we got to go. Not going to, you know, fight it too much. Or in a, you know, classic supermarket tantrums, I'm sure we've all been there. Sometimes you got to do what you got to do. And it's hard sometimes, we're tired, we've had a full day of work, we come home and she's not, you know, your child's not eating dinner. You know, please just eat your dinner. And you know, and they cry and they whinge, but I only want plain pasta with nothing on it or whatever it is. And you kind of feel like, should I just make the pasta so that they eat something so I can put them to bed and I can have a break? And you know, no one can fault you for that. I mean, obviously we all have those moments. But I think in general, we have to try to gather the courage sometimes to face some of that and hold the line and deal with the fallout, essentially. And I think the more you do that and the more preventative you are with that, the less, hopefully, of those kinds of incidents you're going to have. But if we're constantly avoiding the distress and the breakdown, then obviously we can see where that will go, that your child's not learning those boundaries. And as I've already kind of touched on, to help our children's anxieties, I think that's often one. You know, no, okay, you don't have to go to that child's party because you're a bit nervous about it. Okay, you don't have to go to your swimming lesson because you don't like it, or what have you. And obviously I'm saying all of this with the disclaimer, there's nuances to every situation, there's child-specific, situation-specific things to think about. But in general, if you're finding yourself kind of protecting your kid at every moment from things that they're a bit worried about, you're probably doing them a bit of a disservice by not helping them to know they can face things they're nervous about, they can figure out a way through, and then afterwards you can help them to say, look, you were really nervous about that. Look, you went through it, you coped, actually was much better than you thought. That's such a good thing to remember for next time. I'm really proud of what you did there. And you're helping them to encourage to face their fears and not get paralyzed by them, essentially. So that's a really big one, I think. The other one that I often see is really wanting to be friends with our kids. And, you know, there's nothing wrong, obviously, with wanting to be close and loving and have that open, communicative relationship with them. I do think it's problematic where there's no hierarchy. And I'll go into more reasons for that later on, why that might not feel so good for your children. But obviously it's going to be much harder to take charge if there's just that kind of completely even playing field. And often children, actually, it doesn't feel good for them. They're not adults. They're not ready for all of that. They're not ready to talk to you about things that are just not things to think about, finances or relationship issues. We particularly see this, unfortunately, in a lot of separated families. It's a harder one to manage sometimes because there just is a lot going on, and the urge might be to share, but it's not really the wise thing to do. I think the question is, how can we be close and loving, connected with our kids and maintain that sense of safety for them by being the adults in the relationship? And I think that is an important one. Okay, what else have I got? Sometimes we don't have that much time together with our kids, free time to play, so we kind of just really want it to be really good. So we just ignore the bad behaviour and make it really good. You know, and again, there are times for that. It's just worth thinking, if that's something that's going on in your life, how to make sure you're not completely letting go of the boundaries. And parents often complain about this, and there's one parent who does a lot of the working in the week and then is more free on the weekend. They just have a good time. There's that kind of Disneyland parent thing. And obviously that's not good for kids in the end, and something to think about. And often there's this focus on short-term goals. How do I get out of this right now? How do I fix this situation so I can get on with my day and do what I need to do, and not thinking about the longer-term goals of, well, if I just forgive the fact that she was just really rude to me, and I consistently don't pick her up on that, the longer term thing is that that's going to be a kind of implicit permission to speak to me like that. And in the long term, that's not going to be something that you want to see. So it's trying to keep the long term in mind even as you're dealing with the day to day. And it can be hard to manage our feelings as parents, right? It's hard to see our kids distressed. It's hard to see them disappointed, or worried, or what have you, and to try to manage our own feelings and to understand how that might be, how we might be reacting to our children in those moments emotionally is also critical, so that we're not just kind of saying, oh, I can't handle this either, so here, have another lolly and you'll be happy and I'll be happy and I just don't have to kind of face it. And again, not to be disparaging about this, it's hard. I deal with it myself all the time. It's part of being a parent. It's just being mindful of it and trying to find balance with it is what I would advocate for. So what can boundaries teach kids? Delayed gratification. You know, if they're getting everything they want when they want it, there's going to be no way that they're going to know how to wait. And the waiting's hard. I mean, my daughter's taken to running and shoving her hand over my mouth when she wants to talk, and she's not ready for me to finish my conversation. We're working on that right now. But if you don't have any opportunities for them to wait, how are they going to learn to wait? And I think that is an important thing. And also about working towards things and getting a reward for something. You know, we want them to develop, I think, down the line, I've got about self-discipline. Without giving them those opportunities, they're not going to learn it. Gratitude, obviously, if they're getting everything they want immediately as they want it and they've just got an enormous abundance of everything, it's going to be hard for them to feel a lot of gratitude for things. And I mean, I know, I'm hoping I'm not alone in thinking the enormous amount my daughter has, and I've made an effort to try to not buy things, but just birthdays and what have you, there's just like a room full of toys. What child needs that? And I'm trying to work with her on that, but everything's so easily accessible. A lot of it's cheap if anyone's on kids classifieds online, you know. It's cheap to buy secondhand stuff and just give your child another toy, or, you know, Target's got such great clothes, I'll just pull out something else and give it to her. But it's, in the end, it doesn't foster this sense of gratitude, that you don't get everything all of the time. You don't need to have 15 different types of dolls or cars or computer games or whatever. There needs to be some sense that things are special. It's not an all the time thing. Sometimes it might be waiting for an occasion to get something special, or working for something, or as a reward for a great term's work at school, whatever it might be. And I think there's a lot of value in our kids being bored sometimes. I think our tendency may be to just kind of ply them with a million different activities. We don't kind of want them to be bored. Us ourselves, I know all of us, and we talk about this a lot in the staff, thinking about the stillness stuff we were trying to do last term. And this term is this kind of, I've got 2 minutes, I better check my phone. You know, I've got 2 minutes, what's on, you know, my news feed, what's on Facebook, what emails have I missed? There's just not a whole lot of sitting around not doing a whole lot. I went to a comedy show lately and they talked exactly about that. You know, we used to just wait for a bus. And we'd go on our left foot and we'd go on our right foot and we'd wait. You know, we didn't have everything at our fingertips. Kids don't, I think we're in danger of not allowing ourselves to ever have any downtime without something at our fingertips, but certainly for our children. And it's amazing to see what kids do when they have a bit of space, a bit of boredom. There's a great ABC program, I don't know if you've ever seen it, like Life at 1, Life at 3. There's a whole series, and there's one which they take these kids into the bush, and a couple of them who are really addicted to computer games, and they don't really have activities, and they've got to sit and kind of make their own fun. And they come up with stuff, you know, they do, and they come up with great games, or they create something, or they think about things, and especially the young ones. I don't quite know exactly how old all your kids are, but they're, you know, there's a chance for them to be creative and use their imagination. We want that for them. And also, if we're always playing them with activity, we're only telling them that you need activity to be okay. Unless you've got something to do, maybe you're not going to be okay. And I see that a lot with the high school kids. They've got so much on, but then when they have downtime, they actually don't know what to do with themselves. So I think that's a really important one as well. To develop their own resources, of course. We want them to be able to be reliant on themselves and sort out their own coping strategies, but I'll talk more about that as well. Self-discipline, their kind of own intrinsic motivation. If they're never given those boundaries, it's going to be much harder for them to develop a sense of where they want to go themselves, you know, and be motivated to seek out stuff that is hard and work for it and figure out the path to get there if we just never make anything hard for them. Social skills, obviously, this is a big one. We kind of really teach our kids what's acceptable and not acceptable in the way you speak to people, speak to friends, speak to us, your teachers. So boundaries, obviously, in that regard is really important. And how to regulate their needs is the most basic one we probably help them with. Help them to learn their needs. I mean, if you think about a baby, that's exactly what you're doing. You're trying to figure out when are they tired, when are they hungry, helping them to get those needs met. But also in older kids, obviously, you know when your kid's lost it because they're just exhausted. Helping to point that out to them and say, look, it's enough, it really is bedtime now, you're really tired, and I think that's why you're so cranky, is very helpful. One, for them to learn that self-awareness, to recognise the signs themselves, and then to help them to know what to do in those circumstances. As I've already mentioned, how to cope with a range of emotions is just so critical. I could go on about that for all day. And how to manage anxiety, which I've already said. So other reasons that boundaries are helpful. So it is actually really frightening for kids to have all the power. You know, it feels like, you know, and teenagers particularly, it depends obviously on the age group, but teenagers particularly will talk about, oh, that mum, that my friend's mum lets her go out all night and doesn't have a curfew and what have you. It doesn't generally feel that good for that kid to have a sense of like, well, where's the limits? Where's the boundaries? Who's waiting for me? Who's thinking about me? And kids that have all the power at home and can kind of wield everything at their demand, it tends to not feel good, and it tends to encourage more of those kind of acting out behaviours. And it's something that's important to think about. You're actually providing a sense of safety and security for your kids by having those boundaries and those limitations. It's not a good feeling for a child to feel in control all the time about everything. You need to know where the end point is and where the goals are. I think that's really important. Oh no, sorry, it's not broken down. So Beyond is a psychoanalyst some time ago, but I really like his concept of containment. And again, it kind of starts with, easiest way to explain it is with babies and their parents. And that essentially, as I've already said, you've got a baby who's crying. The mum or dad's job is to take those tears, that communication, and understand what it is that they need. Okay, maybe you're cold, let's try and bundle you up, or you're tired, or try to put you to sleep. And essentially what you're doing is you're receiving that communication, you're digesting it for them, you're thinking about it, and you're feeding it back to the kid in a way that's more palatable and helpful for them to manage. And I think that's a really nice little image to think about for our own kids. You know, our kids might give us some kind of communication, some sense that they're emotionally dysregulated, they need some help. And we've got to help, we've got to receive that as a communication, think about what it is that they're dealing with, and transform that into something that's more palatable for them, something that they can understand that addresses their needs. The other one is predictability, of course. Obviously, we can't be, all of the time, 100% of the time, exactly predictable and consistent. But for kids to generally know what to expect of us is a really helpful thing. The structure of school, as much as, some kids will say they don't love it, but there's a lot of value in that, of knowing where you need to be, what you need to be doing, who's going to be there. All of those things are very soothing for kids in many ways, for us as well as adults. A lot of people, if you think about retirement, a lot of people in retirement kind of without a much structure really struggle. That structure and routine and predictability is a very, very helpful thing. Sorry, I just want to double check what. Yeah, so for example, say you're trying to encourage your kid to go to sleep on their own, so you're not sitting patting their back for 3 hours every night. So you say, okay, we're going to start this. I'm going to say goodnight. I'm going to leave the room. You're going to go to sleep. And you do a couple of nights, and then they have a breakdown and say, Mummy, please just stay with me. Please, please, please. And they're crying, and you think, oh, fine, I'll just stay, and you stay and you do it. And the next night you try, no, I'm not going to stay. And maybe you stay, maybe you don't. Depends how loud the screams are. I mean, first of all, you're kind of teaching them what they need to do, how much they need to escalate to get a response from you. But then also, in a way, it keeps them on edge. Like, they don't know what to expect. It's a bit of a roller coaster. Are they going to get their wishes fulfilled? Are they not? What's it going to be? And it's a far more difficult thing, actually, to manage emotionally than having even a disappointing boundary that you don't actually want, but you know what you're getting. So obviously there are exceptions to that, but in general, thinking about predictability is a really important point for kids as well. And put acceptance and love, regardless of transgressing boundaries. It's good for your kids to know that they don't have to be, and I'll talk about this in a bit more, a perfect child. That you're going to love them even when they stuff up, or they make mistakes, or they're rude, or whatever. That doesn't actually interfere in the relationship. And that they can trust that you can call them on some of that stuff and still be there. If it's this constant, everything is okay, I'm not going to really call you on anything, you're not really giving them that message. We want them to have a sense that there can be the hard stuff and the easy stuff and the soft stuff, and my parents will be there no matter what. And that is proper security, to know that your parents are going to be there even if you've been really bad at school. They're still going to be there, still going to ultimately support you. Actually gives a lot of freedom to go and explore. You can't do that unless you've got that secure base. Or only if I'm good, and we see this a lot as well, these very good kids, only if I'm good will things be okay. Will my parents be happy with me? Will they kind of give me the love and approval that I really seek? And it kind of prevents any exploration of anything else. You just always got to be a people pleaser, and that's not great either, obviously. Oh, no perfect child. I told you I was going to talk about it later, and there it is. So that is important. We don't want to give our children, as much as we adore them and we think they're the best child that maybe has ever been born. And I remember a friend of mine saying, her husband was, she was saying, everybody thinks their child is the most beautiful. And he said, oh, yeah, they do. But really our child is the most beautiful. No, everybody thinks that. Oh, yes, of course. But our kid is. And I think we all think that way. And it's great to love them and think so highly of them and have a lot of belief in them. But they needn't be perfect. We don't want to create a sense in which they need to strive for perfection all the time. Obviously, we can think about why that's not helpful. But also, it leaves no room for them to make mistakes. And also, when you don't call them to account, I'm thinking of a case I had when I was working in private practice. His parents came in very distressed. Their child was getting in trouble all the time at school, suspensions, etc. But as soon as he did something at school, Mum would be at the school gate, at the reception, blasting whoever it was that got him into trouble for something and defending him to no end. There was just no accountability. She was just I want to defend my child and protect him, and then couldn't hear anything of what he might have done. Even though she was really concerned he kept getting into trouble, she was really concerned about his behaviour, she just couldn't hold him to account. She'd always kind of jump in and defend him. And we can, and I guess this is where we often get confused, we can support our children, but still also hold them to account for the things they don't do so well. And that's actually really important. It's important for us as a school that we can work together in that way. And it's important within your families too. Important for your kids to know. And also, of course, they're multifaceted people. Who's perfect? We're not perfect. It's okay for us not to be perfect. It's okay for them to see that we're not perfect. It's modeling for them, right? It's helping them to be okay that things aren't black or white. We're not good or bad. We're everything, all combined. We're multifaceted people. So, Of course, just another acknowledgement, it's not easy to deal with the fallout of these things. It's really, really difficult, right? Who wants to deal with a tantrum? It's hard to stand by your convictions, but the more you've thought about it beforehand, the more you might have agreed with your partner, the easier it's going to be to feel like you can stand strong and dig your heels in and keep your position in a calm way, hopefully. So now we get to the how. And again, being a psychologist, maybe this is frustrating. I'll get to some specific strategies, but again, I want to kind of think about some guiding principles initially, because obviously there's no hard and fast rule, as much as people want that from us as psychologists all the time, there just isn't. But what we can do is think about guiding principles and general things that might inform your decisions, and then I'll get to some practical ideas as well. So what's behind the behaviour is one of the biggest things that I talk about with parents and teachers. If we just look at a behaviour, and I guess here we're probably thinking more about kids who might be acting out, we just look at that as it is and not understand where it comes from. We're really missing, looking at the tip of the iceberg rather than everything underneath. Not to be too Freudian, but behaviour is always a communication. It's always to tell us something. There's no behaviour that's just a behaviour for no reason. Usually it's emotionally driven. There's some kind of cause, and I think it's really important when you're thinking about how do I manage my child's behaviour to think, well, what's the function of that behaviour? Why might they be doing that? What are they trying to achieve? What are they trying to get at? So why are things happening versus what is happening? And often it's thinking about how are they trying to get a relational need met, an attachment need. So are they trying to ask, they need a bit more of your time, or they're inviting you in to set a boundary. That's something that often happens as well. So when people talk about attention seeking, I really dislike that term. I think maybe they are seeking attention, but they're seeking attention because something's lacking for them. They're needing a bit more of your help. They're needing your guidance. They're needing your presence. They're needing somebody to recognise something of what's going on for them. And it is important to be wary of these labels that you might apply to your child. I visited somebody with a newborn and they were saying, oh, he's just so impatient. And it was like 2 days old, literally, in the hospital, so impatient. And I thought, well, gosh, he's 2 days old. And he's just come out of the womb. He isn't used to needing for anything. And he's expressing to you that he's hungry or he's got, gas or whatever it is. He needs a change. It's his way of communicating. And I think we stop short when we label our kids. Oh, they're being manipulative. Oh, she's just attention seeking. It's a brat, whatever it is. I mean, there are times we need to sound off, hopefully not anywhere near your children. But those labels just stop thinking altogether, I think, and are very unhelpful. They don't get to anything of what really is going on. There's a guy called Ross Green who does a lot of work. He has 2 books, probably has more than that, but and I've got some resources at the end that I'll put up for you, where he deals with quite challenging behaviour in kids, and he talks about kids do well if they can. Your kids aren't out to be naughty. It's not a good feeling for them. They're not out to be difficult all of the time. They tend to show these difficult behaviours when they can't manage whatever situation they're in front of. So whether it's about skills in terms of regulating themselves emotionally, whether it's about in the classroom they're overwhelmed because they're just not following the work, they just can't keep up, they got lost somewhere. But they do well if they can, and it's a really, really good philosophy, and I think it's good to remind ourselves of. Children also aren't out to make our lives incredibly difficult, They show us where the gaps are, and we've got to try to recognise what they are and figure it out with them. And they want to feel understood, If you're just dealing with the behaviour, I really think of it as a Band-Aid solution. You can get rid of behaviour, that's all right, You can pretty quickly slap some massive consequence on or what have you, but it's not actually going to get to the cause of anything. So trying to understand and help them to understand is a massively important thing. You think about how calming it is for you if you're distressed about something, you have a great conversation where you feel the other person is really getting what you're saying. It's entirely calming. There's a concept about feeling felt, and it's very grounding. So having that ability to do that for our kids is really key. So asking yourself, what is the underlying feeling driving the behaviour? Okay. This is another one I probably pull out every talk I give, but I don't know if you've heard of the Circle of Security program. It's a parenting program. It tends to work more in the kind of earlier years, but I think it's relevant for all of us. And I just like these key principles they have. So this always be bigger, stronger, wiser, kind. I think it's a really nice little framework for how to act as parents. What kind of positioning should we have? You know, you can be bigger and stronger, but if you're not kind, it's kind of this tyrant type persona. And if you're always kind, but you're not bigger and wiser and stronger, you're kind of probably too lenient. So it's trying to keep the balance of those different things and hold that position. Again, it's that idea of the container, kind of containing your child's emotions and helping them to guide it. Because again, there's nothing harder for a kid than feeling that what I'm experiencing is so frightening that even my parents can't manage it. They want to avoid it. They just tell me to shut up or whatever it is. It gives them the message that if they're so frightened by it, then surely I can't manage it myself either. And I like this kind of, absolutely follow your child's lead. We do want our kids to have a voice, lots of voices, lots of opinions, to be involved, to be thinking people rather than, this idea of kids as a kind of blank slate, that we just need to impose our views on them. So absolutely, whenever possible, follow their lead. But when necessary, take charge. And I think one without the other leaves it all off kilter. Okay, so this is another one I like. Strike while the iron is cold. I'll explain what I mean in a second. But there, and again, I'll put these resources up there, but Dan Siegel and Tina Payne Bryson have written a couple of books which I think are really fantastic. The Whole Brain Child and No Drama Discipline. And he does a really nice little hand model where he just takes his hand. This is the kind of brainstem, the thumb is the kind of emotional center, the limbic system, amygdala, and this your fingers as the cerebral cortex, which is the more thinking part of the brain. And I often say to kids, and it's amazing how much they retain. I had a year 3 kid come and talk to me all about the amygdala because she learned it in class in learning about mindfulness. But there's the emotional brain and there's the thinking brain, essentially. And so when this is firing, the emotional brain is firing and completely activated, it really shuts down the communication with the upper part of the brain, which is the more rational, executive function, planning part of your brain. So there's a few ways to go with this, but one is that, the point of this slide was, if that's firing and your kid just does not have their rational part of their brain switched on, you can lecture as much as you like, you're probably not going to get very far. Kids need to be calm before you do the correction. So that is a really key thing with managing tantrums, with setting limits. You need to kind of choose the right time. So I talk about strike while the iron is cold, not when it's hot. In the midst of something, when everything's blowing up, it's not the time to have any kind of lengthy discussion, but certainly not the time to think that you're going to get very far with trying to explain your reasoning. So having that as a little model is important. And he talks about flipping your lid and to recognize when you might have flipped your lid, but also when your kid has, and think, okay, now is not the time. First I need to calm, connect, and then we can get onto the correction and the redirection of what to do next. So I've said all of that. The other thing is that repeated experience of that literally changes the structure of one's brain. So there's a lot of information now in the last couple of decades about neuroplasticity and the idea that when neurons fire together, they wire together. So the more experiences you can have, you can help your child to have of connecting, being upset and having some kind of calming way to soothe themselves and then a different way forward, the more wide that kind of connection is going to happen, and it's going to be more easier for them to access in the future. You're like I like the analogy of there's a kind of well-trodden garden path. So they might be used to kind of demanding that they get what they want for dinner, and if you say no, they scream and whatever, and it's an automatic thing, there's no thinking involved, it's well-trodden. To develop a new path, we've got to trot it down a bit, we've got to repeat it. But it gets well-trodden and it gets a more automatic system that happens in your brain and in your kids' brain. So the more experiences you can give of helping them to manage their emotions and doing so in a calm way, helping them to calm and then figuring out what's happening, you're helping them to bring that part of their brain online, to soothe the lower parts of their brain, and then think it through in a more helpful way. But again, there's a lot more detail in those books if you want to look further at that. And choose circumstances which are most likely to create a successful outcome. So I say to parents, if you're going to set a new rule or limit in your house, don't do it, if you're saying, okay, only half an hour computer time a day or whatever. And so then when it's 25 minutes that your kid's been on the screen, you say, okay, 5 more minutes. And they used to spend 3 hours or whatever it is. You're probably, first of all, you're catching them at a time they're totally distracted and engrossed in what they're doing. They're completely unprepared for it. It's in the midst of it all. It's probably not going to be your most successful way forward. Try to gather a little discussion on the Sunday afternoon when everybody's pretty chilled and it's not the topic of the day, and you're in a fairly calm mood and all the rest of it. It's probably much more likely to be successful in getting the outcome that you desire. Okay, and I just think always to be reflective. I'm just mindful of the time, so I'll speed through this last bit. Be reflective as parents. Be aware of what your own pitfalls might be, what emotions. What I was going to flag here is there are emotions that we are more and less comfortable with as parents. There are emotions that we might have had parents that were very, very angry growing up, and that can kind of maybe go either way. I know my parents were never angry, and I've got an allergic reaction to anger. I just cannot tolerate, I can, but it's, I don't like it. I'm much more comfortable with sadness. I can sit with a grieving person in the depths of their grief and manage that okay, but hostility, I need to build up my strength for. And thinking about that for yourselves, what are the things with your kids that you might be more or less tolerant because of your own experiences, because of your own views, and just trying to be mindful of that. And it is okay to apologise to your children. I really, really believe that. If you've made a mistake, you've been too harsh, you've been too whatever, address it after the fact, absolutely. Okay. And I could also talk about this all day, but your relationship with your child is central. You cannot think about discipline as much less likely to be effective if your relationship with your child is just not in a good place. Sometimes, and I really like this parenting pyramid, and if you look at kind of ideally where you should put your energy as a parent, according to this model, it's a lot about connection, very little about actually consequences, limits. That's kind of at the upper end of the pyramid. The baseline has to be connection, and you do that through things outside of whatever the issue might be that you're trying to manage. Connect with them, play with them, talk with them, listen to them. Go and see things that they're doing, show interest, make that time to be mindfully present with them. I think is really critical. Okay, some practical methods to saying no. So we've got giving choices, and my daughter now knows this very well. I say you can have this or that, and she says, those are not good choices. She's 4 to be fair, but giving choices is quite a nice way where it works of giving your child a sense of autonomy, but within the limits that you're happy with. So you can do your homework before or after your afternoon snack. You could watch TV, on Saturday or Sunday. I don't know, whatever it is. You're giving them choices, but you're kind of setting the boundaries of those. And you can say yes with limits. Yes, we absolutely can watch a movie, but it'll have to be this weekend. Like maybe Saturday afternoon, let's pick out a movie and we'll watch it together. We'll have popcorn. It will be great. So you're saying yes, but you're doing it with the limits that you're happy with. Like I said before, yes, you can run down the footpath, but stop when you get to the corner. Where possible, opportunity for do-overs. If your child's been really rude to you, give them the chance to say it in a better way. If they've done something wrong, give them the chance to do it right. Again, it's that connection, them building, practicing, doing it in a certain way and laying those foundations neurologically. And also just practically speaking. So I only need to raise my eyebrow now with my daughter. She's on it. She knows to repeat herself and do it much nicer. Where possible, though, have a conversation. I don't think it ever needs to be this really kind of tyrannical, I demand you to do everything. Have a conversation where possible. That doesn't mean you need to have 3-hour conversations about whether or not they're allowed to go to their friends this weekend. I mean, there's limits to that. But if they've done something wrong and you're trying to correct it, it's great to go, hey, what was going on? What happened? And give them a chance to talk about it. Helps them to think about it and connect the dots, helps you to understand, and you're connecting before you do that redirection, which is also what Daniel Siegel talks about a lot. Validate their feelings. Validating their feelings is not the same as validating their behaviours. So I understand you were really angry with me because I said no, but it's not okay to hit me. You know, you don't need to, that doesn't mean you're agreeing with what they're doing, but we all like to feel heard and acknowledged before we can move on anywhere. You're just going to have a lot more luck getting anywhere after that. So validate their feelings. Grant their wish and fantasy is another one that Siegel talks about a lot. So things like, oh, I wish that I could stay home with you and we could play all day and I didn't have to go to work and you didn't have to go to school. Oh, that would be amazing. And you're just kind of a bit more playful with it in that way. Emphasize the positive. So that's the whole thing about, rather than don't hit your sister, be really nice to play gently with your sister. Like, I know you love her, but try and hug her a bit more gently rather than don't hug her so hard. So trying to flip it to the positive, so you're telling them what you want to see. But also emphasize the positive in terms of when you catch them doing something good, it's a really good idea to do that. Say, I love how at that moment when I said no, I could see you were disappointed, but you calmed yourself and you managed yourself. Whereas last week you screamed, so it's just amazing what you're learning. Something like that, as long as it's, in your words, it doesn't sound too patronizing. And be creative, I don't know if any of you saw on doing the rounds on social media, this thing of different kids getting into car seats. You've got the one who's a noodle and they're all very wobbly and you can't quite buckle them in because they're so wobbly. Or the one who's like straight that's a board and you can't, strap them over. Or the ones who take forever to get in the car. My daughter is a slow poke or beyond description. She takes an hour to get in the car. So I've had to try to be creative, like, right, I'm going to time you. How quick can you get in the car? And she loves Rainbow Dash from My Little Pony. Okay, Rainbow Dash, let's go. Try to change it up so it's not always so serious. Think of something a bit crazy, a bit out there to just change up what you're doing. Other points to remember, discipline ultimately is about teaching. We want to teach our kids. We don't want to just be correcting them for the sake of correction. We want to teach them. So what do you want to teach them? Having that in mind helps a lot to kind of guide what you're going to do. It's best to do it when you're calm. As I said, if you're not calm, take a minute. You don't have to do it immediately. Do it when you're ready. Say, you know what, and it's really helpful to model this for your kids. I'm feeling a little bit too upset now. I need to calm down, and then I'll come back and speak to you in a minute. I'll have a think, and I'll come back and speak to you. Be preventative where possible. As I said, don't wait for the massive explosion. If you see it starting to simmer in your child, be like their emotional coach. I see you getting a little bit upset by that. What can we do at this moment? But also, as I said, setting up, you're changing the rules around at home, set it up well in advance. Don't do it in that minute when you're trying to instigate a new rule, at dinner time or what have you. Be consistent, but be flexible. So rigidity with any of these things is just no good. There needs to be some room for flexibility, but do try to be consistent. That makes a great deal of difference. And generally talk less. We all talk too much as parents. Can lecture very easily for quite a while and give them all the different reasons. Less is more in general with these things. We're helping them also to distinguish between their needs and their wants. So we're in charge of their needs. Yeah, we're trying to figure out what do they need, how do we help you to get what you need. That's very different from what they want. And sometimes those two things just do not go together. And that's a really helpful way to think about it too. And similarly, just because they feel something doesn't mean they need to do it, or because they think something doesn't need to mean they act on it immediately, or and vice versa. So all of those things are just good things to remember. Here are some of the resources that I've drawn upon today and I really like as pretty comprehensive parent guide. So Raising a Secure Child is Circle of Security, written for parents. The Whole Brain Child No Drama Discipline has got that really fantastic neuroscientific basis, so it talks a lot about the brain, but I find that very helpful as a means of also stepping outside of it and thinking, what's going on for my child actually internally in terms of their development, the structure of their brain at this minute. Saying No is a more psychoanalytic text, so it's less directive, but it's kind of talking about the different ideas, different age groups around saying no and the different things that tend to come up. So it's not really as much of a practical guide per se, but Between Parent and Child is another really lovely book. How to Talk So Kids Will Listen and Listen So Kids Will Talk is a fairly practical guide as well. Parenting from the Inside Out is yet another one that's more about reflecting on your own experiences and how that might be affecting you as a parent today. And Lives in the Balance is the Ross Green website, and on there you'll see there are some articles and YouTube links and links to his books as well. So, has everyone got that down? Or and my email address, if you want, is that, Tamara K at IGS, and the rest of it. But I've spoken a lot today. I know there hasn't been as much time as I imagined for discussion, but I'd love to open up now if there are any questions, anything anybody wants to raise before you go and feast yourselves on the good morning tea that we've got over there. Anything anybody wants to ask? Sure.
Hi, Tamara.
Hi.
With an indecisive child and giving choices, how do you go about that?
So what would tend to happen if you kind of giving two choices and like, I really
I
don't know.
The answer's always, I don't know.
Well, I guess, it depends what you're trying to aim for again. Are you trying to help them to be more decisive?
Yeah.
So therefore that might be a good thing to be doing. If it's not about trying to give them a sense of autonomy, you're trying to do that and you say, well, then I can just choose for you, but you probably want to have more of a voice in that than what you've said now. But I guess it would be about trying to think about what choices might I give, that you might even kind of stack your cards a little bit and make choices that you're pretty clear what it would be. Or you can say, well, let's try one today, see how it goes. We can try the other tomorrow, depending what it is, obviously, and see how that goes, and then we can talk about what works best. So those would be the kinds of things. I mean, I'd kind of be thinking, what is it about the decision that feels a bit difficult? Is your child worrying about making the wrong choice and missing out, or upsetting you, or whatever it might be? So I think just trying to figure out what is it that's going on in there. What are you trying to teach? Is it about managing their behaviour? Is it about helping them to be able to make decisions? It's kind of a whole other thing. But I think there are ways in that you could try to guide it. But it's a tricky one. And helping them to make decisions, and I guess when he has made a decision, to recognise that and let him know that was great, and it's great to try stuff out. And you might model that yourself and say, okay, I've got to decide between these two things. I'm really not sure. I think I'll go with this and try it out. Then I can see, so you kind of help them with the language by talking about your own experiences in that way. We could probably talk a lot more about it, but yes. Anybody else? Is there somebody to know? Okay, well, thank you so much for coming.
I get to jump up and say thank you so much. I just wanted to say thank you, Tamara, for giving a wonderful talk. I think it's really important to say thank you to everyone for coming today, because it's really important, as you said, for us to stop and reflect on these. I think some of these things we already know, but we tend to sort of relegate them down the list a bit, and so it's always great as a community for us to come together to reflect on these and to be reminded and to be given resources, because I know that a lot of us like those resources.
Yes,
so what we might do is also try and send them out to everybody who's attended through the humanities function that we've got, so everyone can get a copy of this and follow through with all those resources. I wanted to say thank you. Here's something
you.
from PTF to say thank you for taking the time of preparing for all of this.
No
because
problem.
We know how important it is that that we create these opportunities for all of us.
Yeah, thank you all for coming.